In Mark 1:17, we saw Jesus calling Peter and Andrew, "Come here, right behind me, and I will make you become fishermen of men." How do you think they respond to that call? Let's read. Kai euthus aphentes ta dictua ecolusesan auto. The verse is very small, it's very brief, so it's not going to take us a long time, but it has very interesting features in it that we're going to discover. Kai euthus, that's the typical conjunction used by Mark. It's peculiar to Mark. Mark likes to move from one image to another using this kai euthus. We saw it already at least twice. For example, when Jesus gets baptized, kai euthus, and immediately as he came out of the water, he saw the heavens splitting apart. Or, for example, after the voice coming down from heaven, "You are my beloved son," Kai euthus, and immediately the Spirit took Jesus and threw him into the wilderness. Kai euthus, it goes with Mark's style, which is very vivid and wants to move fast to keep the reader's attention. So, what happens soon after Jesus called them? Immediately after Jesus called them? Well, this is the verb ekolusesan, but then there's another verb here, which is aphentes, which is a participle. Okay, participle in the aorist tense. Okay, this participle with this entes ending tells us that this is a nominative masculine plural. So who is referring to? Well, it's referring to Andrew and Peter. Okay, so Jesus calls them, and immediately aphentes. Okay, what is the verb here? The verb is aphiemi. Aphiemi. Like that. Now, aphiemi is a composite verb, and this af prefix here is actually coming from the preposition apo, okay, where the omicron has been dropped and the p and the pi softened into a phi. Okay, so aphiemi comes from the preposition apo, which means we know it away from. So apo means away from, and the verb hiemi, which means sending. So afieme is really sending away, literally. And if you send away, it's because you're casting away, you're renouncing. Okay, you're renouncing, you're leaving things away from you. You're sending them away from you. Okay, so what are Andrew and Peter doing as soon as Jesus calls them? Afentes, leaving aside. Well, what are they leaving aside? Ta dictua. All right. So ta is a definite article in the neuter gender. Okay. Neuter plural. Okay. Why? Because dictua, again, this alpha ending is neuter plural, is the noun to which the definite article agrees. And so ta dictua means the nets. Okay, dictua comes from dictuon. Okay, dictuon, which means net, is the fishing net, is the general term that indicates a fishing net. So Peter and Andrew, as soon as they're called, they just throw away, they send away, they leave their nets. Remember, Mark 1:16 told us when Jesus saw Peter and Andrew, they were doing something with their nets. And Luke specifies that they were washing their nets and preparing them for the next fishing session. So they're there working on their nets. And as soon as Jesus says, "Here, come behind me, I will make you fishermen of men," they just drop their nets. That's what Mark is saying. They're dropping their nets and they're following Jesus. So from the beginning and immediately dropping the nets, ekolutzesan. Now, this is the verb that holds the whole sentence together and comes from the verb akolutheo. Okay, akolutheo. Okay. Now let's try to understand this verb because it's very peculiar. First of all, there is this alpha in front. Now, most of the time, when you have compounding terms where one of the two components is an alpha prefix, that alpha is so-called privative alpha, an alpha that negates what comes after. In English, we have many examples of privative alpha. Think about the word atheist. Atheist comes from a theos, without God, right? An atheist is somebody that does not believe in God, right? So this is what usually the prefix alpha is about, negating something. This is not the case. Sometimes the prefix alpha has that meaning that it's called copulative, that indicates an association, a company. For example, in Greek, brother, you say adelphos. Why? Because it comes from the copulative, not privative alpha, copulative alpha Delphos, which means womb. So if you're a brother to somebody else, it's because you shared the womb of your mother, right? So this alpha indicates a sharing, all right? This is the alpha that we're talking about here. Okay, this alpha is not a privative alpha, is a copulative alpha, meaning that you're sharing something with somebody else. Now, what are you sharing? Well, kolutheo comes from the same root of keluthos. And keluthos means road. Okay. So akolutheo means walking the same road of somebody else. All right. Walking the same road of somebody else. So usually this verb is translated as to follow. To follow. Because if you walk the same road with somebody else, you're following. But really, the idea of the verb is more going together more than following. It's really a companionship. So what Jesus is telling them to come with him now translate into Andrew and Peter leaving and dropping their nets and going together with, walking the same road as. All right. And this verb, which by the way is conjugated in the aorist tense, needs a dative case. And you see it because auto has this omega with iota subscript, okay, which we know it's a clear indication of the dative case. And auto, we saw it many times, is the personal pronoun, okay, in the third personal singular. So it means him, okay? So, and immediately dropping the nets, they followed him, or they walked the same road with him. Now, it's interesting to go and see how Luke describes this part. Remember, Luke, he was the one that gave us all the details of this episode of Jesus calling James, John, Peter, and Andrew. Luke 5:11 talks about what happens when Jesus calls Andrew and Peter. And he says, Kai katagagontes taploia, meaning leaving and bringing taploia, the boats, epitengen, on the shore, on the land. So they drag the boats on the land, they leave them there. And then he uses the same expression, afentes, like leaving, dropping, panta, ekolusesan auto. So there's the same verb. So leaving something, they follow him. The thing that changes, you see here, is panta. So Mark says, leaving the nets, follow him. But Luke says, even more than that, leaving panta, all, everything. Okay? Everything. Panta means everything, is the neuter plural, okay, neuter plural of the adjectives all. So it means everything. So Luke is saying they didn't just leave their nets, they left everything: the nets, the boats, their house, their life. They dropped their life as they knew it and they follow him. Well, how do we know that Luke's interpretation is the correct one? Well, we have a confirmation of Luke in Mark. Mark chapter 10. Remember when Jesus talks about how hard it is to enter the kingdom of God if you're rich? It's a very famous passage. He talks about the camel going through the head of a needle. He talks with a rich guy that wants to become his followers, and Jesus says, well, you're just missing one thing. If you want to become my follower, just go back, sell everything you have, and come with me. And at that point, the rich guy breaks down, and Jesus comments how hard it is for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God. And so the disciples get concerned, they get a little scared. They're like, wow, this is a radical type of call. Who is going to be saved? And well, Jesus responds, well, what is seems to be impossible to man is not impossible to God. And at that point, Peter jumps up. Out of all the disciples, Peter jumps up and confirms what Luke is saying, what we just read in Luke chapter 5. Peter jumps up and says, well, look at us, right? In little boasting, probably. Okay. Mark chapter 10, verses 28 through 30. Peter spoke up, well, look at us. We have left everything to follow you. This is exactly what Luke is saying. And here we have a confirmation from Peter in the Gospel of Mark, 10 chapters after. What is Peter referring to here? Well, he's referring exactly to when Jesus called them. So don't complain, Peter is saying to the other disciple. Don't complain. Don't be concerned that this call is too radical, looks too radical to you. Look at us. We left everything. Peter says, we left panta, we left everything to follow you. Jesus' response will be, yes, I acknowledge that. And that's exactly why you 12 are going to be the one that are going to judge all the 12 tribes of Israel, right? So you're going to be in a very important place in heaven. So he confirms that Peter and all the apostles did the right thing. They left everything to follow him. And that's what Jesus' disciples are called to do. But what is all this panta that Peter is talking about, that he left, and that Jesus is advocating for their disciple to leave? Well, Mark in chapter 10 tells us, Jesus says, truly I tell you, no one who has left home, brothers, sisters, mother, father, children, fields, for me in the gospel will fail to receive 100 times as much as in the present age. Homes, brothers, sisters, mothers, children, and fields. These are all the things, panta, that Jesus is asking us to leave, to drop, to follow him. Why would you do something like that? There could only be one reason, and the reason can be found in Matthew chapter 13 when Jesus talks about the parable of the hidden treasure and the pearl. Let's read this because it's very short. Jesus says, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joys went and sold everything he had and bought that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant looking for fine pearls. And when he found one of great value, he went away and sold everything he had and bought it. Everything. When you find something that is more valuable than your own life, you drop your life and you follow that something. This is exactly what Andrew and Peter must have found. that hidden treasure, that pearl that is so valuable, more valuable than anything they had. So they dropped their nets, they left their boats, they left their house, they left everything, panta, because they were convinced at that very moment when Jesus called them that they had found something more valuable than anything else they ever possessed. Remember when Jesus said, Matthew 10:39, whoever finds their life will lose it, and whoever loses their life for my sake will find it? This is exactly what happened to Andrew and Peter. They decided to lose their life, meaning the old way, their old life. They decided that their own life was not as valuable as the new life. They decided to lose their life to win a better new one with Jesus. And if you go and read the same passage in Luke that you'll find in chapter 17, you'll see that Jesus preaches that whoever shall seek to save his life shall lose it, and whoever shall lose his life shall preserve it, right after having said something very specific. Luke 17:32, remember Lot's wife. That's the verse. Simple, brief verse. Jesus says, remember Lot's wife. Now, let's spend some time here because this is a very interesting story. Who is Lot and who is Lot's wife? Probably you know the story of Lot, Sodom and Gomorrah, right? God is upset. He wants to destroy all these cities. Now, he sends his angels to rescue Lot and his family, to take them out from Sodom before God rains down fire from heaven. Lot is saved by the angels sent by God together with his family, together with his wife. But while they're leaving Sodom and they're getting into safe place, what happens? It happens that Lot's wife turns around. And the moment that she turns around to look at her city, at her house, her old life, she's immediately transformed in a pillar of salt. And so Jesus says, remember Lot's wife. What does that mean? Well, it means that if you're not able to detach yourself from your old sinful life and you turn around and you still have an attachment to that type of life, then you're not worthy to follow Jesus, to become Jesus' follower. This is what Jesus is saying. You have to remember Lot's wife. You cannot turn around. Once you're chosen and once you say yes, there's